Good afternoon,
Hey,
JR.
Phil.
How are you?
Good.
He's coming.
I'm
Promise.
coming. Got lost.
Beautiful weather.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. Springtime. Jay, today we're looking past the healing of the man at Bethesda, and we're looking at a sign of Jesus' provision for us.
Yep.
We're again in John chapter 6, and it's a continuation in John. We talked a little bit about chronological order. John seems to go along with, was it Matthew and Luke?
Luke.
And Mark's kind of not in any particular
Right,
order,
right,
is he?
right.
But the best-selling book, Unbroken, tells the story of Louis Zamperini, and his Air Force bomber was shot down in the Pacific Ocean, and him and two crewmates hung to a life raft, fighting off sharks, surviving on just meager rations. There were miles and miles of unforgiving ocean ahead of them. You know, as far as being able to swim anywhere, they couldn't make anything. And if there was plenty of enemy out there, you know, that would capture them as POWs. So they were in a desperate situation. They were trying to hope. They were hoping for survival. In this week's passage, we see Jesus and what he can do with meager provisions, just a little bit of something. His disciples were in a difficult situation. They had a big crowd gathered, massive, they say. We don't know exactly how many people there, but they say over 5,000 men.
Right.
So if you take women and children, that could have been 10,000.
Could have been easily been 10,000.
So they didn't have much to go around, but they had one powerful God there. A lot of people relegate Jesus to spiritual realm only. Like the spiritual is separate from all the other areas that he's Lord over. But Jesus saves the whole person. He seeks to help and sustain us in all the areas of our life where we have needs. Now, doesn't mean that we'll get what we want, but he will provide us what we need, and we can trust him to do that. And we can also be a conduit of those provisions he gives us to help other people.
Right, right.
Aside from the resurrection, Jesus feeding the 5,000 is the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels. Yep. And so it's obviously pretty important.
It means it was important, right?
Yeah. It's a significant sign, and God thought it was so important that he had each of them recount the event from their own perspectives. And in John's account, we see here that they had crossed over the Sea of Galilee, and the crowd followed him. It's getting harder and harder for Jesus to get away from the crowds, and of course he had been doing these little miracles along, and we think now that he has called the disciples out, and this is after that.
Yeah.
So
And possibly after the healing of the man by the pool, which would
right.
brought more attention to him, and then he healed the royal man from the royal palace, his son, and changed the water and wine. Did lots of miracles that we don't even know about, probably.
A big crowd like that today would provide. It would bring some issues out. You know, you would have problems. You'd have people maybe not getting along. You might have people hungry, you know, sick. That's what they were coming for.
They were coming for the...
People were just having a hard time.
But the writer talked about them coming either to be healed or to watch him heal. Either one
Yeah.
was a big deal for those people to see
It was.
this man who was from their neighborhood actually, and what he was doing.
And you know, we don't think about it much, but they didn't have any TV. They didn't
No,
have
no.
any type of entertainment.
No.
When something happened like this, it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And so they
So
came from everywhere.
They walked everywhere anyway, so they was used to walking, getting out and walking
Yeah.
and messing around. And
The disciples wanted to send everybody away
right.
and go provide for themselves. And, the crowd getting big, they couldn't get away, get rest. And, all these people were pressing in on them. So I guess, they were getting a little frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus had compassion on them. Let's look at the scriptures. We understand the practical concerns of the disciples wanting some time by themselves.
Yeah.
Gather up something, see if we can get something to eat. You'd gather up enough for 12. That's quite a few. That's a pretty
Right.
good crowd.
Yeah.
But you figure 5,000 to 10,000. That's a bunch.
That's a lot of fish and a lot of bread.
Let's look what John says about
John
the
says in
feeding of the 5,000.
chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, after this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. Now, Sea of Galilee had several names. Sea, I think, something like that,
Yeah,
or Tiberias.
yeah.
But we know of it most times the Sea of Galilee. A huge crowd was following him because they saw the signs he was performing by healing the sick. Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with the disciples. Now, the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. So when Jesus looked up and noticed a large crowd coming toward them, he asked Philip, where will we buy bread so these people can eat? As you said, they've left the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. Well, they probably were leaving Capernaum. It's probably about where they were. Sea of Galilee is like a big teardrop, with the top part being the biggest, and then it comes down to a point at the bottom where the Jordan River runs. It runs in the top and runs out the bottom. And they might not have completely crossed, but they might have crossed from Capernaum, which is on the northwest side, to a city on the northeast side, going around the curve, in other words. It's probably what they did, but we don't know exactly where they went. But they actually left to probably.
It's easier to get in a boat and sail up
Yeah,
through
it
there
is to
than it
walk.
is to walk across them rocks.
Yeah,
to get to
exactly
that
right.
side.
But it's also the Sea of Galilee. Well, you can stand where Capernaum is, and I've been right there on the shore, and you can see the entire, from north to south and east to west. You can see it all. It's not like when you go to Nolan Lake or Cumberland River, Cumberland Lake, where you can't see around the curve.
Yeah.
You can stand in several spots on the Sea of Galilee and see the whole sea. So I'm sure when these people saw them get in the boat, they could follow them. Now, they might not have got there as quick as the boat did, but they could see and look out in the waters and just walk around the shore kind of and get there not too long after they did. And that's probably what the people did. So they started following him, and the reason they were following Jesus was because of the signs that they saw him performing by healing the sick. We know that we've already studied about him healing two people, the lame man at the well and or at the pool, and the son of the man who was a ruler. We saw him heal both of those. We don't know how many others he's done, but he's done a whole lot of signs and miracles. And they were following him in huge crowds. The signs they were talking about was a display of God at work in the ministry of Jesus. They could tell this man was different. They had heard rumors of other people, and John the Baptist had done some healing, I believe, but this was different. This was somebody that just kept on healing, and anybody that came to him, he could heal them, no matter what the problem was. It says they went up in the mountain. Phil, there's no mountains there.
What we call them out.
That's right. It's not the Smoky Mountains. It's like it's actually not much higher than going up Muldrow Hill.
Yeah.
When you come up it coming home from Louisville, it'd be a little bit taller than that on the north or the northwestern side, northeastern side, which is where the pigs ran down into the water later on. That was a little bit taller, but the northeastern side was not much more than coming up Muldrow Hill. But it looked like a mountain to them because it was the only spot around it that went up that high. So it wasn't real high. But they went up there, probably to get away from the crowds. And we sometimes don't think of the fact that Jesus was a human. Did Jesus have a need to sleep
Sure,
and eat
sure.
and rest? Just like we do.
Totally
But
human, totally God.
It-
But he was in a human body.
he was in a human body, and he had that need to rest. And the disciples did too, of course. And I'm sure that Jesus, knowing what he was there for, had more stamina than the disciples. They were probably saying, "We need to sit down and rest." In fact, we know other places where they tell him, "Let's rest for a while." But they were going to try to get away from the crowd. Now, then John talks about the fact that the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near, and the writer says we don't know exactly why he put this in there, because the Passover feast would not be there in Capernaum, it would be in Jerusalem. Well, that's one of the three festivals that they had when that Jewish men had to go to every year. But I think what he's saying is when it comes upon one of these festivals, or when it gets close to Easter, Phil, we see people being more interested in church for them because they start thinking about God and thinking about Christ. And I think he was saying that these people were heightened, their spiritual awareness was heightened because of what was coming up.
Yeah,
The Passover was coming up. Because, like I said, we were a long ways from Jerusalem, but that's probably what it was. So Jesus, when he looked up and saw the crowd coming, it says a huge crowd, and you're going to get into how many numbers, you've already talked about that briefly, that he asked Philip. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, which is probably close to where they are right now, because they left Capernaum and went to the west, and Bethsaida is around the curve and up, maybe almost on the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. So they were probably over close to where he was. And Jesus asked, "Where will we buy bread so these people can eat?" The disciples in the other Gospels have already said, "We got all these people here and we can't feed them."
Yeah.
They were not concerned. They were concerned about it, but they were saying, as you already said, they said, "Send them home. We can't feed them." Jesus asked this question of Philip, knowing that their answer wasn't what Philip was probably going to tell him. I think he was wanting to see what Philip would say, how much faith Philip put in him at this particular time in his ministry, and with what he could do for this situation. He knew it was a bad situation. Now, when he talks about bread, Phil, a lot of times their meals were made up totally of bread.
Yeah.
It was made out of barley, a cheaper grain. Barley was grown everywhere, and they ate a lot of bread. Now, he talks about fish. The Sea of Galilee was known for its fish. But it could have been, as the writer talks, a fish paste or a topping for the
Stew
bread. Yeah, or stew maybe, or something like that. But anyway, it was a small morsel.
Something they could pour
small,
over
that bread.
rock hard bread.
Soften it up a little bit.
Soften it up.
Yeah. But we see from these verses that the crowd is described as huge, but the situation presented a problem because these people were hungry. Not only were they hungry, Phil, it was probably getting towards late in the day, and that's what some of the other Gospels say. And they were at least 4 or 5 miles from the closest town, and they were a long ways from Canaan, which is Cana, which was probably the biggest town, because we stated earlier it had 1,400 people, but yet Capernaum only had about 700 people. You think about 10,000 people or 5,000 people descending upon a town like Cana,
Yeah.
or Bethsaida, or Capernaum,
Or Hodgenville.
or Hodgenville, exactly. And we see some of these festivals when they come into a town,
Uh-huh.
but you have people bring food in.
Absolutely.
You
That's
take
part of the preparations that are made.
You take Glendale days; they have as much food
Yeah,
booths as they
yeah,
have anything else,
yeah.
and they still run out of food.
Yeah.
So it was going to be a problem, and the disciples were concerned about what these people might do, what they might think, and I think Jesus was concerned about what the people that had come to follow him might think about his ministry if he said go home, and it didn't try to help them in any way at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was setting it up to teach a lesson here, and we're going to see that he did. But Jesus saw the people, and now we're going to see how Philip answers the question and what Jesus does about the problem.
Yeah. You know, Philip had told his friend Nathaniel
Yeah.
to come and see, come see what this guy's doing.
Yeah.
I want you to see him. And then he got there and he got tested, didn't he?
Yeah.
So what? Jesus knew where he was at, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. He knew where he was at.
Why did he ask him? Why did he ask him?
I think he's seeing what he would, if he had realized that the power that God, Jesus had, maybe
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
He's seen him do all these miracles, but had he seen him produce food from a basket?
Yeah, yeah. And I think Jesus was all about self-evaluation. Where you at? You know,
Yeah,
where's your
yeah,
faith at?
yeah, yeah.
He's always testing those guys.
Yeah. He was testing him, yeah.
Anyway, in 6 through 11, it says he asked this to test him. For he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a boy here that's got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down. The men numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also with the fish, as much as they wanted. Now, Jesus knew already what he would do,
Sure.
but he wanted to test Philip.
Yep.
So it's not temptation test,
Yeah.
you know, like Satan tempts us.
Right.
But it is a testing intended to lead Philip to further and deeper commitment
Yeah.
as a follower,
Yeah.
and have him to evaluate himself. And through this ordeal, he wanted him to grow in his understanding of who he was, and understand his power better. You know, he had already demonstrated that he was going to tell others when he said to his friend Nathaniel,
Yeah.
come on,
Yeah.
won't you see this guy? So the miracle of Jesus, he and his friends would see the power of God many, many more times as they followed him. 200 denarii, a denarii was a day's work. So you're talking about 200 days of work for a man. And they said, you buy that much bread, and it wouldn't give a morsel, just a
little bit,
morsel
yeah,
to
right.
each one. So they didn't have enough money there
No.
among them. They didn't have 200 denarii.
No. No.
And they didn't have the labor.
Well, you didn't
or
have
the
the
time.
food available either, as we've
No,
already talked
no,
about. You could
no.
strip everything out of those little small cities, and they wouldn't have enough food.
Every city around through there, and you know, it was better around Capernaum
You're right.
than it was other places. But everybody around there struggled to make
Yeah.
it every day.
Yes. Yes.
You know, find enough to eat. Life was a struggle. There wasn't no Kroger, no Winn-Dixie, no A&B. So they had to struggle by hand and hunt and gather food. And they say there was plenty of grass there, so you like to think they had enough there to raise some animals. But you're talking about a town of 2,000, and
At
you
the
got
most.
10,000 people, 5 times the population descends on it. So they say 5,000 men, and we just, you know, it's a guess. I say 10,000, but it's a guess. It's not written in the Bible, but it says 5,000 men. And we see Andrew come up. He's often talked about as a soul winner. And he brought people to Christ at least 3 times in the scriptures. And he was a disciple of John the Baptist, so he had been in this from the early on.
Early beginning, yeah.
And I assume, although it's not stated, that John the Baptist had probably baptized him.
Yeah, he'd already,
At some
well, I
point
think
in
he'd
time.
already been beheaded. If you look at some of the other gospels and they, I think John probably had already been beheaded this time.
And after Jesus came on the scene and John the Baptist and he run in, well, Andrew, he starts following Jesus.
Right.
So he's named along with Peter, James, and John. They press Jesus further about destruction of the temple later on. So you know he's inquisitive.
Right.
And so tradition claims Andrew was crucified on X,
Yeah.
not a cross, but an X,
Just tied on.
just
they
tied
said.
on. He didn't want to be nailed. He was just tied up on an X and
How long
died
did he
that
live
way.
like it?
Well, I don't
A
know.
long time.
Probably a couple of weeks. You
Yeah,
know?
I would think so.
But anyway, rather than to die like Jesus, tradition holds that he wanted to die that way, believing he was unworthy to die the same manner of Christ. So a boy,
Yeah.
Andrew brings him this boy.
Do you think disciples had been, well, obviously they've been thinking about it because had they already been out looking?
I'd say they had.
I think they had to. I think they've
So
been
they had.
scouring the crowd and see what we had
And they
available.
discovered it was like
They
a plague of
wasn't-
locusts done moved in there on that
Wasn't
ground,
anything.
and they'd gobbled up everything
Yeah.
probably within any significant area. And that's
Yeah.
why they wanted them to send, Jesus to send them away.
Yeah.
You know, if they had some type of provision there,
Yep.
it was going to be maybe struggle to be enough for them.
Yeah.
So anyway, he brings this boy. He only had a little bit of food, meager food supply. Only the book of John identifies who has it. 5 barley loaves and 2 fish.
Yeah.
There's not much food for 10,000 people. You know, and Andrew says, "What are they for so many?"
Yeah.
It shows the meagerness of the provision that's
Right.
there.
Right.
So, you know, here's this crowd, maybe in excess of 10,000. Jesus gives thanks for this food that he's got. And he starts distributing it. They pass it out. And it says there, after he distributed it to those who were seated. Now, Cheryl, what about the ones that didn't sit down?
I
When he
think, they
said sit
all, I
down?
think they all got
Think
fed.
they all sat
I
down.
think they all got fed, Phil.
But it said they distributed it out.
If you're standing there and the rest of the people around you are getting fed, and you see another fish in that bucket, I think you're probably gonna sit down.
Well,
Or either that or you're not hungry,
Yeah.
one of the two.
but it says, so also with the fish after he gave thanks for it. And it's important that he gave thanks for
Right.
it. It's important for us that we give thanks for the provisions that God gives us. God provides for our needs, and we need to do that all the time. Jesus took the bread and he gave thanks, then he did the same for the fish.
You know, you could ask the question, how did they know it was 5,000 men? Well, in the other Gospels, it talks about it being divided into groups of 50 and 100.
Yeah.
So there was some order
Yeah.
to how they were seated.
Yeah, it wasn't just total bedlam.
No, this wasn't just sitting down in a big
And you
hump.
know,
It
a
was-
crowd like that, you couldn't have it.
No,
and
no.
feed everybody.
Yeah,
But, and from Andrew's perspective, at least he could make sure that his master was able to eat
Yeah.
if we sent these crowds away.
Yeah.
But Jesus had compassion on them.
he did. Yes, he did.
He has compassion on us, no matter where we're at,
Mm-hmm.
to provide for our needs. Jesus saw the boy give his food to the disciple. That was an act of kindness, wasn't it? To share that. So he was going to demonstrate how much is little when God has control of it.
Right, right.
And it's pretty good. Little's much when God's in it. And then a wives' tale or something.
Yeah, yeah.
What obstacles hinder us from trusting Jesus with our needs, our daily needs?
for one thing, I think we think about what's going to happen in human terms. What could we do in that situation? We can't manufacture food. We can't ask God to change a watermelon into 10 watermelons,
Yeah.
but God can. So we're limited to what we think we could do in a situation,
Yeah.
how we could help.
How much okra we can raise
Yeah, yeah,
in our garden, or you know, vegetables and things.
sure.
But Jesus works in ways unknown to us.
Right.
We see it demonstrated throughout the scriptures. And we think of the barriers and we just stop.
Yeah, we can't do that.
Yeah.
There's no way that can happen.
And then that
We-
next,
We sit down.
the next scripture talks about what we need. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
some more lessons there for us, isn't there?
Yep. We're in 12 through 15 now, these last verses. When they were full, that's talking about the people now, he told the disciples, collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they collected them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces from the barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, this truly is the prophet who has come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him the king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. They sat down, ate, divided out the food. Lo and behold, they had more left than they did when it started, Phil. Had 12. We don't know how big the basket was, but they had 12 baskets now instead of the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. The people received more than they needed. Not only did Jesus meet their needs, he met their needs plentifully, which is the same thing he can do for us at times in our lives. And he didn't say why he wanted to collect it, other than to say that so nothing is wasted. Maybe Phil, Jesus wanted to show them what good stewards would do, or maybe the disciples would use that for the next few days. We don't know. Or some of the people would take it home with them. What do we do when we go to a restaurant? We have food left over.
We put it in that little
get it-
styrofoam thing we
Get
get
a
and bring it
to-go
home.
box and take it
Yeah.
home. And that might have been what happened. Or Jesus could have handed it out to somebody else on the next day or two. We don't know exactly what happened, but they took up some, and it was 12 baskets full. All the Gospels talk about that number. But then the people, look what it says there in chapter 4, verse 14. When the people saw the sign he had done, when they saw how he had blessed the food and broke it, and it just kept multiplying and multiplying until everyone was full, they said, this truly is the prophet who has come into the world. They started thinking about the Old Testament prophets that they'd read about and probably had been taught about throughout their lives, about this man who was coming, this Messiah, the prince, the king, was going to come and make their world so much better. And they still believed at this point in time that he was going to be an earthly king. And in fact, Jesus alludes to that in the next verse when he says, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him the king, he withdrew again up onto the mountainside. Now this time they weren't as willing probably to follow him because their bellies were full and it was getting darker and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
They'd seen another big miracle, and they didn't follow him like they did earlier in the day. But he knew what they were going to do. He could, of course, God knows everything, and he knew that. He also knew that what they were thinking, but he knew that his time hadn't come.
Yeah.
He knew it was not his time to become made an earthly king.
Yeah.
And he withdrew away from the situation so that he wouldn't have to handle that at this point in time. He went up on this, probably higher up on the mountain, and this is a hillside he got away from him with. And Jesus needed to do that from time to time. We already talked about that. Jesus' feeding of the multitudes near Galilee was a sign that, it was a sign that he was the prophet who had come into the world. Mm-hmm. We know that that's what he was. But Jesus' time to conquer nations hadn't come yet. And we know that not only was that true, but what he had to go through in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
His life, his birth, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. They still wanted a Jesus, a prophet shaped in their image, the way they wanted him to be, that could give them what they wanted rather instead of what they needed.
Yeah.
Now, do we do that sometimes?
Absolutely we do.
We want Jesus and God to do things for us that we want him to do rather than what is best for us.
It's amazing how much, although deep down we may attribute it to Jesus, we attribute to our own hand.
Yeah.
You know, we're able to grow this, we're able to harvest this, and you know, we're able to raise enough there on this little half acre for 4 families. You know,
Yeah.
but we can't grow nothing.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is, you know, we can't provide anything without Jesus.
The point of the lesson tonight is Jesus meets the needs in our lives, but the connection to the point on this last one was that since Jesus satisfied their needs that time, their hunger, we're going to see that they really expect more from him. There wasn't enough. Now, it was at that particular night, but we're going to see later that they wanted more from him. They wanted more signs, more miracles, bigger miracles.
Yeah, subsequent verses show that they were hanging on. They were hanging around him. They want some more of that free food.
They liked being around this guy. Great lesson, great story.
It is. You know, and it also, when they took up those leftovers, I think of my grandmother, Akers, and how she was thrifty.
Most
And
grandparents are our
We
age were
had
like
we
that.
had an end of the week soup pot, you know, and it was a mystery what it was going to be, but she wouldn't throw nothing out.
Hey,
Vegetables went in there, you know, and tomato juice, and she
that's-
always had something cooking there.
that was back when they didn't have freezers, everybody, but you still kept it.
Yeah,
And when the freezers came around, I mean, I was know of a lady here in the town that she put every little. If there was 3 tablespoons left, it went in a plastic bag or a little cup and went in the
Soup
freezer.
pot.
That's right.
my mother is the same way.
Yeah.
She got that from my grandmother.
Yeah,
And she'll
yeah.
keep, you know, a half a sandwich or whatever, and she'll eat that for lunch the next day. Or, you know, she's always keeping stuff, and you know, on occasion things might spoil in the refrigerator.
Yeah, if you're cooking good enough, it'll be all right.
But he provides for us, and we ought to, I guess, be good stewards.
Yeah.
Not for lack of a better word, be good stewards of what he provides for us, and
And
those
appreciate
things.
what he's done for us, even though it's not exactly what we think we needed at the
We
time.
see what Jesus did there. He prayed about it before they ate. He
Yep.
prayed and gave thanks for it. So what do we do with this study, Jay? The writer of the study said, write a prayer of confession to the Lord, admitting the times you focused only on your own desires.
Might be a
And
big,
ask God to help you see things as he sees them.
that might take more than a page or two, Phil.
It might take, it might take a little bit.
A notebook.
And then also find a way to share our resources.
Yeah.
Look for ways to
Yeah.
share our resources, like this boy did. You know, or if, like Andrew did, he found somebody that maybe could help some.
Yeah.
You know, we get in situations a lot of times where we don't know what to do for a person, but yet we know somebody who might know, or who has helped someone in the past, then we can hook them up together. God can take our little bit, and we see here he can do much with
Make
it.
a whole lot.
Yeah. And then spend time in prayer about ways that you can show compassion like Jesus did on those 10,000 people.
Yeah.
There he had opportunity to turn them away or to do something with them.
And what would that done to his ministry? if
Well,
he
what
had-
would the disciples have felt about that if
Yeah.
you had turned them away?
Yeah.
They wouldn't have thought a thing of it.
Well,
They thought, you know, he needs some rest. He needs,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
needs. They were worried about his
yeah,
needs.
they were worried about him.
But he had compassion on those people. People can be a blessing. People can be a burden. but be willing yourself to be a blessing to someone.
Yeah, yeah.
Seek somebody out that you can share your provision with. You know, in this, Jesus' disciples found themselves in a difficult situation, overwhelming numbers, a huge crowd, hungry crowd,
Yeah.
and no food to feed them. But they had a powerful God who was with them there and had compassion on the people and provided for their needs, just like he does for us today. And he seeks to help us in every area of our life, not just the spiritual areas. And we can trust him to do that. We can trust him to provide for our needs. So yeah, it's a great study. This group of studies are just wonderful.
I think next week is gonna be a continuation of this, and what happens after people leave, and God, Jesus sends the disciples away, we'll see what happens then.
It's a sign of his presence.
Yes, yes.
I'm enjoying bringing these studies to you. I hope you're enjoying them, get something out of them.
Yes, we are.
I hope you can enjoy enough to be back with us next week. Good night.
Good night.